Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into a genuinely fascinating historical contradiction, how the United States established control over the Philippines using two vastly different simultaneous approaches at the turn of the 20th century. Right off the bat, we've got to ask ourselves, how exactly does an empire build schools and distribute land with one hand while simultaneously banning a nation's flag with the other? I mean, it's a massive contradiction, right? What we're actually looking at is a highly calculated mix of what history often calls the carrot and the stick.
Here's our roadmap for exactly how this dual strategy unfolded between 1898 and 1907. We're going to cover establishing American control, the transition to civil rule, the strategy of co-optation, the pacification campaign, and lastly, the laws of suppression. Let's get right into it.
Part 1. Establishing American control, and specifically, the military grip.
Right after the fall of Manila, President William McKinley knew he needed swift, absolute authority to suppress further uprisings. And notice how incredibly fast the U.S. cycled through military governors here, starting in August 1898 with General Wesley Merritt, then General Elwell Otis, and finally General Arthur MacArthur. For 3 whole years, these guys weren't just commanding troops out in the field. They held absolute executive, legislative, and judicial power over the Philippines. The whole shebang.
Moving on to Part 2, Transition to Civil Rule, looking at the commissions and the Spooner Amendment. Well, as you might guess, pure military might alone couldn't build a sustainable colonial government, so the American strategy had to pivot. Look at the stark difference in this table between 1899 and 1900. The first commission under Jacob Sherman was purely foundational, investigating the situation and relationship building. But just 1 year later, the second commission, led by William H. Taft, arrived with a highly actionable mandate. They were there to actively improve the economy, set up public schools to teach English, and create civil service laws for local governments, a total shift in gears. And that brings us to a huge turning point, the Spooner Amendment, passed by Congress on March 2, 1901. This law officially shifted the power dynamics away from the military to a brand new civil structure. By July 4th of that same year, the civil government was officially inaugurated in Manila, with William H. Taft stepping in as the very first civil governor. Which leads us perfectly into Part 3, the strategy of co-optation, or winning the elites. This is the carrot side of things. To build what they branded as benevolent assimilation, the new civil government offered massive rewards to local leaders and educated elites who were willing to swear loyalty. They distributed previously seized Spanish friar lands back to Filipino farmers, they opened Manila up to global trading, and they introduced a new educational system run by early American instructors known as the Thomasites. Taft even directed a massive census in 1903 to build out a modern bureaucratic framework. This is literally textbook bureaucracy being used to win over an occupied population's elite. To really lock in that trust, extremely competent Filipinos were elevated to high positions, the most notable example being Cayetano Arellano, who was appointed as the very first Filipino Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. It sent a clear message: play ball with Taft's administration, and there are major immediate career perks. But here's the catch, and it's a huge one. This perfectly captures the stark historical duality of the occupation. While those loyal elites received the sweet rewards of co-optation, the vast majority of Filipinos who were actually still fighting for absolute independence faced a completely different, brutal reality. For them, the promise of benevolent assimilation was replaced by the crushing weight of pacification. And that brings us to the dark side of the occupation, in Part 4, the pacification campaign, suppressing the resistance, the stick. American forces aggressively targeted anyone who refused to bend. They even coined a specific term for defiant leaders, the irreconcilables. We're talking about historical figures like Apolinario Mabini, Artemio Ricarte, and Pablo Ocampo, who outright refused to swear allegiance to the United States. So, in response, the colonial government literally just removed them from the board, deporting these leaders entirely out of the country to the island of Guam.
All right, Part 5, Laws of Suppression. Let's look at the actual anatomy of this control.
To systematically break down the remaining civilian resistance, the Philippine Commission rolled out 4 severe escalating laws. And as we step through these, it is wild to see how systematically they tighten their grip, going from literally banning words to eventually outlawing visual symbols. Step 1 was the Sedition Act in November 1901. This effectively placed a total ban on even the concept of independence in the public sphere. You couldn't campaign for it, you couldn't form a political party around it, and you certainly couldn't criticize American officials. This law directly targeted the press, and it forced critical, independent newspapers like El Renacimiento and its sister publication, Muling Pagsalong, to shut down entirely. Exactly 1 year later, we get Step 2, the Brigandage Act. Now, this is a classic tactical move of colonial control, weaponizing language. By legally relabeling political revolutionaries as mere bandits or common outlaws, the government could attach the terrifying penalty of death or life imprisonment to their cause. It's a powerful reminder of how controlling the narrative can control a population.
And the human cost of this language shift? Absolutely devastating. Take Macario Sake, for example. He founded the Tagalog Republic, but he wasn't treated as a defeated head of state. Instead, he was accused under the Brigandage Act of 1902 and was ultimately executed in 1907. Just a tragic reality of how that law was applied. So while the fighters were criminalized, everyday civilians were literally corralled. Step 3 was the devastating 1903 Reconcentration Act, also known as the Zone Law. Entire communities suspected of supporting the revolutionaries were forcibly relocated into American-controlled town centers. The tactical goal was simple: cut off supply lines to the fighters, but the result on the ground was widespread hardship. Men couldn't even leave the zones to work the fields, which led to starvation and severe illness. This sheer desperation is exactly what prompted remaining leaders like General Miguel Malvar to finally surrender.
Finally, Step 4, the 1907 Flag Law. The government had already targeted the press, the fighters, and the local communities. Now, they targeted the visual identity of the nation itself. They strictly prohibited the public display of any emblem used during the 1896 to 1899 Philippine Revolution. The colonizers held this very specific belief: as long as Filipinos could simply see the objects that reminded them of their struggle, that nationalist spirit would stay alive. So, we've just seen these intense dual tactics in action, rapidly building up a civil infrastructure while ruthlessly tearing down civil liberties. It's a lot to process, but I'll leave you with this one final thought. When an empire tries that hard to erase an idea from the minds of a people, can a nationalist spirit truly be suppressed simply by hiding its symbols? Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll see you next time.